welcome to Dark Horror Narrations Rules. All stories on this channel are narrated by me, a real person. Tonight's story is called 4 Rules for Harrow Point Station. Before we get into it, I want to ask you something. If you were completely alone at an isolated coastal station for 3 months, no neighbors, no cell service, nothing but ocean and fog and dark, which of the 4 rules do you think you would be most tempted to break? Drop it in the comments. Alright, let's get into it. By the time I understood what I had done, I was already standing in the fog. Rule 2 was clear. If the fog rolls in before midnight, stay inside until it clears. It was 11:47 when I stepped through the side door of Harrow Point Station. The fog had come in around 10:30. I had been outside for approximately 4 minutes before I thought to check my watch. And when I turned toward the cliff edge, the thing that had been standing there had already moved. I did not see it move. That was the point. It only moved when you broke a rule. Those 4 minutes were all it needed. I know that now. I knew it then too, if I am being honest with myself, which is something I have had a great deal of time to practice since Harrow Point. My name is Luke Reardon. I am 34 years old. For 3 months, in the fall of 2023, I was the sole on-site ranger assigned to Harrow Point Coastal Monitoring Station, located at the northern tip of the Crestmere Headland on the Oregon coast. The station is classified as a Forest Service post, though the force behind it is secondary to its primary function, which is atmospheric and tide monitoring. There are sensors mounted on the cliff face, a weather tower bolted to the rock 30 feet above the station roof, a decommissioned lighthouse that still operates a functioning beam for maritime safety, and a main station building roughly the size of a large house. 1 ranger at a time. 3-month rotations, no cell service beyond the radio, no neighbors within 12 miles, and a supply boat that comes every 2 weeks. I requested the assignment. That is the thing I need to be clear about from the start. Nobody sent me to Harrow Point as punishment, or by accident, or through some administrative error. I had just ended a 4-year relationship. I had been working a shared post outside of Medford for 2 years, alongside people I no longer knew how to be around, and I needed somewhere quiet. Somewhere the only complications were weather and equipment maintenance, and the filing of accurate data reports. Harrow Point had an opening because the previous ranger, a man named Stanton, had cut his rotation short. The paperwork said personal circumstances. The district office contact I spoke to used the phrase personal circumstances twice in a short phone call, which I noted as slightly unusual but did not pursue. I should have. The supply boat dropped me at the dock at the base of the headland on a Wednesday morning in early September of 2023. The water was gray and flat. The boat was piloted by a woman named Greta, somewhere in her late 50s, broad-shouldered with weathered hands and the kind of face that gives you information without giving you anything. She helped me carry my equipment up the switchback path to the station without complaint and without conversation. When we reached the main building, she set down the last crate, accepted no thanks for it, and handed me a key ring with 3 keys and no labels. Supply schedule is in the binder on the kitchen counter, she said. 2 weeks, same time. That was the entirety of our first conversation. She was back down the path before I had the front door unlocked. Inside, the station was clean and functional. The kitchen and common area occupied the ground floor, along with a supply room, a small bathroom, and the monitoring station itself, which was its own room with floor-to-ceiling windows facing the ocean. The equipment inside the monitoring room was modern and well-maintained. Digital readouts, networked sensors, automated logging systems that mostly ran themselves and required human input only once or twice a day. The data logged here fed into a regional atmospheric and tidal network. My role was oversight, manual calibration when sensors drifted, maintenance of the physical equipment when weather damaged it, and accurate daily reporting. Work that required precision and patience and very little else. It was exactly what I had needed. Upstairs were 2 bedrooms. Only one was set up for use, with a narrow bed, a dresser, and a desk positioned under the south-facing window that looked toward the access road and inland. A small lamp on the desk, a single overhead fixture, and a bracket on the wall where a mirror had been removed. I noticed the bracket and the faint discoloration where the mirror had hung. Someone had taken it down deliberately and had not replaced it. I noted this the way I noted everything in those first hours, carefully, without yet having the context to understand what any single observation meant. The other bedroom had been cleared out completely. No mattress, no furniture, just bare floorboards, a blank wall, and an old curtain rod with no curtain. I stood in the doorway of that empty room for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. The window faced north, toward the tree line where the coastal forest pressed close against the back of the headland. The glass was clean, but the interior sill had scratch marks on it. Fine, parallel lines scored into the paint and into the wood beneath the paint. Not accidental. Not the kind of marks a window latch makes when you open and close it repeatedly. These ran the full length of the sill, grouped, deliberate, made by something gripping the sill from the inside repeatedly over a long period of time. 4 parallel lines per group, the same width as 4 fingers pressed close together. I went back downstairs and made coffee and told myself it was nothing. The binder Greta had mentioned was on the kitchen counter exactly as described. It was thick, well organized, with tab sections covering equipment maintenance schedules, monitoring protocols, emergency contacts, radio procedures, supply inventory logs, and an incident report template. I sat at the kitchen table and read every section in full before I unpacked anything. That is just how I work. I have always been the person who reads the documentation before touching the equipment. At the back of the binder, behind a divider tab labeled simply Site Notes, I found a single laminated sheet that was clearly not part of the original document. The lamination was newer than the binder itself, glossy where the binder pages were matte. The text had been typed and printed rather than filled in on a standard form. Centered at the top in plain text it said, Rules for Harrow Point Station. Underneath, numbered and single-spaced, were 4 rules. 1. Walk the perimeter of the station building at exactly 9 p.m. every night. Stay on the marked path. Do not deviate from the path for any reason. 2. If the fog rolls in before midnight, go inside immediately and do not come back out until it is fully cleared, regardless of other obligations or responsibilities. 3. The lower level door is to remain locked at all times. Do not enter the lower level under any circumstances. If you hear sounds from below, do not respond in any way. 4. Do not look directly at the water from the cliff. Walk after dark. Keep your eyes on the path or on the station building at all times. If you see something in the water that appears to look back at you, go inside immediately and do not return to the cliff walk until daylight. I read the sheet twice. Then I set it on the counter and read it a third time. The language was direct and specific in a way that did not match the procedural, liability-conscious tone of everything else in the binder. The binder was written by a legal department or a district manager. These 4 rules were written by a person, someone who had thought very carefully about each word and chosen it for a reason. They read like instructions from someone who had learned them in a way that cost something. I looked around the empty station. The monitoring equipment blinked steadily in its room. Through the west-facing windows, the ocean was gray and wide and moving slowly. The lighthouse beam was not yet active, still 2 hours before the automated evening timer would start it. The building creaked once, a deep structural sound that could have been temperature change or wind pressure. I put the laminated sheet back in the binder behind its divider and told myself it was a hazing ritual. A tradition at isolated postings, something the previous ranger had left to unsettle the next one in. I believed that for approximately 4 days. The first 3 nights at Harrow Point were quiet in a way that had texture. The ocean was always audible, a constant low-frequency pressure that I stopped consciously registering within 36 hours the way you stop hearing an air conditioner. The fog came and went on its own schedule, sometimes appearing within an hour of sunset, sometimes holding off until near midnight, sometimes not arriving at all. The lighthouse beam began its rotation each evening at dusk, sweeping white across the water every 8 seconds. I tracked it from the kitchen window while I cooked dinner on the first night, and watched it until I was certain of its interval before I stopped watching. The 9 p.m. perimeter walk felt self-conscious the first time. The marked path was a simple rectangle of small, reflective posts set into the ground at even intervals around the station building, close enough to the walls that a purposeful deviation would require actual intent. The walk took 11 minutes at a normal pace. Nothing happened during the first walk. Nothing happened during the second. On the third night, I began noting specific details in a small notebook I had decided to dedicate solely to the perimeter walks: the quality of the air, the visibility toward the tree line and toward the cliff, whether the lighthouse beam was creating shadows or washing them out. Small things. The kind of things you note when you are trying to read a place that is not yet readable. On the fourth night, halfway through the walk on the north side of the building, I found that one of the reflective posts had been moved. Not knocked over, not tilted by frost heave or soft ground. Moved, deliberately, approximately 3 feet from its original position toward the tree line, repositioning it just off the true marked path. There was no wind that night. Nothing that could have mechanically shifted a post seated 6 inches in the ground without disturbing the surrounding soil, which was undisturbed. I stood looking at it in the beam of my flashlight for long enough that the cold became uncomfortable. Then I reset it to its correct position and finished the circuit. In my notebook I wrote, Post 4, north face, displaced approximately 3 feet toward tree line. No weather explanation, reset manually. The ground around the post was undisturbed. I wrote the word deer in the margin and put a small question mark after it, and told myself I believed it. On the 5th day I found the lower level door. I had not been looking for it. The station layout as described in the binder mentioned no lower level, no basement, no substructure. The building's official description listed ground floor and upper floor only. I found the door when I was cleaning the supply room, moving the metal shelving units away from the walls to sweep behind them. The shelving was heavy gauge steel bolted together in 3 sections. When I moved the leftmost section, there was a door in the wall behind it. Heavy wood in a stone frame, original to the building or older, with iron hinges gone dark with age and a padlock that was modern and well maintained and matched. I discovered after a moment of stillness one of the 3 keys on my ring. I stood there holding that key in my hand for a full minute. The padlock was already secured. I had not put it there. The lock was engaged. The rule said the lower level doors to remain locked at all times. The lock was already in a state of compliance. What I had found was not a rule violation. What I had found was evidence that whoever wrote the rules had known about this door, had known about it specifically, and had included it in the rules, not as a precaution but as a necessity. I moved the shelving back into place and left the supply room, and did not return to it except for supply retrieval for the next 3 weeks. That evening I took the laminated sheet out of the binder and read all 4 rules again slowly. I thought about the scratch marks on the interior sill upstairs in the empty bedroom. I thought about the relocated post on the north face. I thought about the padlock that matched a key I had been given, without explanation. By the time I finished reading, I had stopped thinking of the rules as a joke. Someone had paid attention here, at this specific location, long enough to understand what behavior was necessary and what behavior was dangerous. They had written what they learned down and had the list laminated and put it where the next person would find it. That is not the action of someone playing a prank. That is the action of someone trying to keep the next person alive. The 9 p.m. walk became the most important part of my day within the first 2 weeks. I set my watch alarm for 8:55 to give myself time to put on layers and retrieve my flashlight. I logged every walk in the dedicated notebook with times, visibility conditions, temperature, fog status, and anything I observed along the path. The logging became increasingly granular as I understood more about what I was reading. In the first week, I noted general impressions. By the second week, I was noting specific details about specific sections of the path, the acoustic quality of the north face, the way my footsteps sounded different on the west side gravel compared to the eastern packed earth, how the lighthouse beam hit the fog bank at different angles depending on how far offshore the bank had settled. What I began noticing around the fourth walk was a quality I could only describe as directionality. The sense of being observed was present on the north face of the building, the side closest to the tree line, not on the east face, not on the south face, not on the west face, which brought me closest to the cliff. Only on the north face, and only in one general area along it, roughly corresponding to a gap in the trees where the forest thinned enough that the darkness between the trunks went deeper than the surrounding forest. You could not see into it. You could only sense that it went further than the rest of the tree line. The watching was constant within that area. It did not shift during the walk. It did not increase as I passed closest to the gap and decrease as I moved away. It was simply present, with a steadiness that I eventually stopped finding frightening and started finding informative. By the end of the first 2 weeks, I had enough entries to map the watching as precisely as I could in language. Same location, same general intensity, same quality of presence. As long as I completed the walk at the correct time and stayed on the marked path, the watching was stable. Consistent in the way that weather patterns become consistent once you have observed them long enough to read the underlying system. That stability was meaningful. I understood it as such only after the 6th night. But the stability of a position is only apparent in contrast to its instability, and the contrast arrived on the 6th night, and I caused it. I had been inside since early evening. The monitoring data logs required a backlog review that had accumulated over the previous week, and I spent 3 hours working through it at the desk in the monitoring room. The fog came in around 10:30. I heard it before I saw it, a change in the acoustic quality of the sound the ocean made against the cliff, a slight muffling, as if something had been placed between the water and the station. When I looked up from the desk, the windows were already gray, the lighthouse beam diffusing into the fog overhead, its directional sweep lost to scatter. Rule 2 was in my head. I had read it many times. Fog before midnight, go inside immediately and stay inside until it clears. I was already inside. I had no reason to go anywhere. I went back to the data logs. At 11:30 I finished the backlog and began preparing for sleep. The fog was still heavy, showing no sign of clearing. I checked my gear log, checked the exterior sensor readouts from the monitoring room panels, and was moving toward the stairs when I heard something from outside on the cliff side of the building. I stopped. It came 3 times. A rhythmic sound, deliberate, spaced, then silence, then 3 more. I stood in the hallway between the monitoring room and the kitchen and listened to it happen 4 times. The pattern was mechanical in its regularity. 3 contacts, pause. 3 contacts, pause. Not wind, not settling. Not anything I had a category for after 2 weeks of listening carefully to what this building did and did not do in various weather conditions. I ran through explanations for 4 full minutes standing in that hallway. A loose sensor housing vibrating at a specific frequency. A piece of railing loose enough to strike the building wall when pressure changed. A piece of debris caught against the cliff face sensors. I walked each explanation to its conclusion and found that none of them accounted for the rhythmic precision of the sound. Wind produces irregular intervals. Structural vibration produces continuous sound, not grouped sequences with clean pauses. I want to be precise about what I did next, because the precise sequence of decisions is the thing that mattered. I did not tell myself the rules did not apply to this situation. I did not argue that checking on the sensors was a professional obligation that overrode the fog rule. I told myself I was going to step outside for 30 seconds to verify the cliffside sensors had not been damaged by weather, and I told myself that 30 seconds was negligible. And I knew while I was telling myself this that I was constructing a permission I was not entitled to give myself. I knew it and I did it anyway. I put on my jacket. I opened the side door. I stepped into the fog. The cold arrived immediately. Coastal fog at that density has physical weight, a dampness that coats the skin and pushes into the lungs and makes the air feel like something you are moving through rather than breathing. I could not see the first reflective path post from the doorway. I moved along the wall of the building, using it as a guide, staying close, intending to reach the cliffside sensor array and verify its housing, and come back inside in under a minute. The lighthouse beam moved overhead in the fog, its 8-second sweep reduced to a diffuse directional glow that illuminated nothing clearly and created shadows that had no source. I had been outside for approximately 4 minutes when I checked my watch from reflex. 11:47. Still before midnight. Rule 2 said, fog, before midnight, go inside immediately. I had violated it the moment I stepped through the door. I turned to go back. That is when I looked toward the cliff edge. I do not know precisely why I looked in that direction rather than continuing back toward the door. Something in the quality of the air or the fog changed slightly, or I heard something at a frequency below clear perception. What I know is that I looked and there was a shape in the fog, at the distance where the cliff edge would be. Not ambiguous. Not a rock formation or a fog bank catching the light at a particular angle. An upright shape, occupying space in the way that mass occupies space, with a distinct boundary where it ended and the fog began. I could not determine its precise height or its exact form. The fog reduced it to a silhouette, a column of darker against dark. What I could determine was that it was standing completely still, and that it had a quality of attention that I recognized immediately, despite never having encountered it before. The same quality as the tree line watching on the north face, but closer, much closer, and directed at me with a specificity that the tree line watching had never had. The tree line watching was a position being maintained. This was something that had found what it was looking for. I went back inside. I locked the side door with both locks. I turned on every light I could reach on the ground floor and sat in the kitchen with my back flat against the wall and the kettle on and my eyes on the west-facing window. The fog through the glass was impenetrable. The lighthouse beam swept overhead and scattered, giving me nothing. I did not move from the kitchen for 4 hours. The kettle boiled, and I did not pour it. I sat in the chair with the window in front of me, and I did not take my eyes off it. At 4 in the morning, the fog thinned enough that I could see the cliff walk. The shape was not there. Whether it was gone or simply no longer visible in the thinned fog, I could not determine. I thought about that distinction for the remaining hours of darkness. Gone means it left. No longer visible means it could still be there, present, in a position it had already moved to, simply not visible to me from where I sat. Those two possibilities are structurally different, and I was not willing to assume the safer one. I wrote in the perimeter notebook the next morning in careful language, Night 6, fog event from approximately 22:30. Rule 2 violation, outside approximately 4 minutes. Possible visual anomaly at cliff edge during violation period. Shape, upright, stationary, approximate distance 12 to 15 meters toward cliff. Not present when fog thinned at approximately 0400. No other observations. Then I sat with the notebook open for a long time before writing one more line. The shape was not there before I went outside. And then I did the 9 p.m. walk that evening and learned the most important thing I would learn at Harrow Point. The watching from the tree line was gone, not absent, entirely, not ceased, moved. The presence I had tracked on the north face for 2 weeks, the consistent, stable watching from the gap in the trees, was no longer at that location. When I came around the northwest corner of the building, the corner where the path bent away from the cliff and toward the cliff walk access, the watching came from ahead of me, from the cliff walk itself, closer to the building than it had been, closer to me by approximately 30 feet. I finished the circuit without deviating. I came inside and sat with that information for a long time. I had been outside for 4 minutes in the fog. The shape had been visible at the cliff edge. The next evening the watching had moved from the tree line to the cliff walk. The connection was not subtle. It did not require interpretation. It was a direct, one-to-one relationship between my rule violation and a change in position. I broke the boundary of Rule 2, and something moved from a farther position to a closer one. The rule had not been protecting me from the thing. The rule had been assigning the thing a location. When I violated the rule, the location was renegotiated. Closer. I spent 3 days thinking about nothing else. What I arrived at was a systems understanding. The rules were not repellents. They did not drive the thing away. They were a positional agreement, a set of assignments that told the thing where it was permitted to stand. Each rule maintained a specific location. Rule 1, the perimeter walk, maintained the tree line. Rule 2, the fog rule, maintained the cliff edge. Rule 3, the lower level, maintained whatever was below the station. Rule 4, the water rule, maintained something in the water itself. These were not separate entities. I was not willing to conclude they were separate entities. They were positions, possibly positions of the same thing, or possibly positions of related things, but the logic was the same regardless. The rules told the thing where to be. When you followed a rule, the thing stayed where it was assigned. When you broke one, it moved to a location it now considered earned. 2 weeks passed. I held all 4 rules exactly. The cliffwalk position did not advance. The tree line was quiet. The sounds from below had not started yet. The cliff face and the water, which I had not yet tested, remained in whatever state they were in. The consistency was exhausting in a specific way, the kind of exhaustion that comes from sustained precision rather than from sustained effort. Greta came with the supply boat on the 14th day. She helped carry crates up the switchback path the same way she had at the start, without complaint and without conversation. When everything was stowed, she sat at the kitchen table without being asked. I set the laminated rules sheet on the table between us. She looked at it. She did not look surprised. Did Stanton write these? I asked. No. Someone before him? They go back further than any one person I can name. She looked at the rules, not at me. Torres was the one who had the current version laminated. Before that, they were handwritten on cardstock. Before that, I don't know what they were. But they've been in this binder as long as anyone I've talked to can remember. What happened to Stanton? She was quiet for a moment. He made it 9 weeks. Called me on the radio at the start of week 10. Asked me to come early. When I arrived, he was standing on the dock with his bags. He wouldn't go back up to the station. He wouldn't tell me anything specific. He said he understood now, and that understanding it was enough, and that he was done. She picked up her mug with both hands. Before Stanton, there was a man named Tyler. He made 4 months, which was longer than a standard rotation, but the district let it run because his data quality was exceptional and he seemed stable. Then there was Torres. She made the full 3 months, filed a complete exit report, put the rules in the binder, and requested a different posting. What did her exit report say? Standard language. Equipment in good order. No incidents requiring intervention. Recommended rotation continuation. Greta set her mug down. The thing Torres told me when I brought her back to the mainland, she told me in person, not in any report, was that by the end of her rotation the testing had stopped. She said whatever was here had gotten used to her. She said it felt like an understanding had been reached. I let that sit for a moment. Testing, I said. Greta stood up. Follow them in order, she said. If you skip one or push one, the others stop working. She rinsed her mug at the sink the same way she had on the first day, and set it on the drying rack and headed for the door. At the frame, she paused without turning around. Stanton broke 3 out of 4 before week 4, she said. He spent 5 weeks trying to manage what that cost him and couldn't. Then she was down the path. I read the rules again that evening from the beginning. Follow them in order. The sequencing mattered. Rule 1 before Rule 2. Rule 2 before Rule 3. Rule 3 before Rule 4. Each one built on the previous, and if one was compromised, the architecture it supported became unstable. I had broken Rule 2 on night 6. I had broken it once, for 4 minutes, and the cliff edge position had moved to the cliff walk. Every rule I held from that point maintained the new position. The system had not collapsed. It had adjusted. The cost of my violation was a permanent reposition 30 feet closer to the building. And that reposition was now the fixed point, the stable point, the thing I was now responsible for maintaining. The sounds from below started on the 22nd night. I was in bed, not yet asleep, lying on my back in the way I had started sleeping since night 6. positioned so that I could see both the bedroom door and the north-facing window from where I lay without turning my head, a habit I had developed without consciously deciding to develop it. Positioning for information. At some point between wakefulness and sleep, I heard it for the first time. Not knocking, not footsteps. The rules use the phrase sounds from below, and that is accurate but describes only the location, not the quality. What I heard was a rhythmic pressure. 3 slow, deliberate contacts against what I understood to be the ceiling of the lower level, which was also the floor of the supply room directly above it. A pause of approximately 4 seconds. 3 more contacts. A pause. The contacts were even in force and in spacing, neither accelerating nor decelerating, with the kind of consistency that excludes any mechanical or environmental explanation. Temperature variance does not produce 3-count rhythms with 4-second pauses. Structural settling does not repeat 43 times in sequence and then stop cleanly. I lay on my back with my hands at my sides and did not move. The rule was specific. Do not respond in any way. Any way was a complete phrase. It did not leave room for me to decide that lying still but directing my attention toward the floor was a form of non-response. I stared at the ceiling above me, which was not the floor of the supply room but the underside of my own bedroom, and I counted the sequences. 3 contacts, pause, 3 contacts, 43 times. Then nothing. The station settled back into its normal acoustic register. Ocean against cliff, lighthouse beam rotating, building at rest. 1:17 in the morning. The next morning I wrote in the perimeter notebook, which had by then become a general incident log beyond its original purpose. 22nd night. Sounds from below. Rhythmic. 3 contacts per group, 2 groups per sequence. Consistent pause interval. Duration approximately 40 minutes. Cessation at 01:17. No response given per Rule 3. And then I wrote the line that had been forming in my head while I was lying there counting in the dark. The rhythm was identical to the sound I heard outside on night 6 before I went into the fog. 3 and 3, same interval, same quality. Whatever was below had been what I heard that night. It had made those sounds deliberately, from below, knowing they would reach me through the floor and through the wall and out into the night. It had produced a sound precisely calibrated to be inexplicable enough to draw me outside. I had heard 3 contacts, and I had reasoned my way into the fog to check on sensors I had checked that afternoon. That realization sat in my chest for several days, with a specific weight. The sounds continued, on a roughly alternating schedule, appearing every 2 to 3 nights, always after midnight, always the same sequence, always the same interval. Each time I held the rule. No response. No movement. The duration began decreasing after the first week, from 40 minutes to 30, from 30 to 20, from 20 to 12. I logged each episode in the same level of detail. The decrease was not random. It was proportional to my consistency. 3 nights of perfect compliance produced a 5-minute reduction. A night where I had shifted position on the bed during an episode, not responsibly just to relieve a cramped muscle, produced no reduction in the following episode. The thing was measuring compliance at a granularity I had not expected. It registered the quality of my stillness, not just the fact of it. On the 31st night, I found the marks on the west wall of the station exterior. I had gone out for a late afternoon sensor check on the cliffside equipment, well within daylight hours. No fog, no rule implications. The sensors mounted on the cliff face below the station required periodic manual inspection that the monitoring equipment inside could not substitute for. I had been making these checks twice a week since the start of the rotation. On this particular afternoon, coming around the northwest corner to access the west wall sensor housing, I stopped. Long vertical lines had been scored into the stone of the exterior wall. 4 parallel lines per group, carved into the actual stone of the building, not into paint or wood, but into the quarried stone itself. Each group was approximately 18 inches long. There were 7 groups clustered around the northwest corner at a height roughly between my knee and my shoulder. The stone was hard basalt. The marks were deep enough that I could fit my fingernail into each groove. I had been at this corner 2 weeks prior for the last sensor check. The marks had not been there. I was certain of this because I had photographs in my monitoring log from that earlier check, standard documentation images, and none of the marks appeared in them. The northwest corner was where the path bent away from the cliff walk. It was the closest point of the marked perimeter to the cliff walk position that had settled after night 6. I stood looking at the marks with my flashlight for a long time. They were not damage. The depth was too even. The spacing was too consistent. They were the same mark made 7 times with the same force and the same instrument, whatever that instrument was. I photographed each group, measured the dimensions in my log, and went back inside. That evening, after the 9 p.m. walk, I sat at the kitchen table with my notebook and wrote a sentence I had been resisting for several days. It is not testing the boundary. It is marking where it stands. On the 41st night, I encountered the contradiction built into the rules, and I need to describe it carefully because it is the most important moment of my rotation. The fog began rolling in at 8:32 in the evening. I watched it come through the west-facing windows of the monitoring room, a thick bank moving fast from offshore. By 8:40, it was at the cliff edge. By 8:45, it had reached the station building. My watch alarm for the 9 p.m. perimeter walk was set for 8:55. 13 minutes away. Rule 1. Walk the perimeter at exactly 9 p.m. every night. Rule 2. If the fog rolls in before midnight, go inside immediately. I was inside. The fog was already here. The instruction in Rule 2 said go inside immediately, and I was already inside, so the first half of the instruction was satisfied by the state I was already in. But the rule also said do not come back out until it has fully cleared, regardless of other obligations. The perimeter walk at 9 p.m. was an obligation. The rule said regardless. The word regardless is a complete word. It does not have exceptions embedded in it. I sat at the monitoring desk and worked through the language for 12 minutes. Follow them in order. If you skip one, the others stop working. Rule 1 came first in the sequence. Rule 2 came second. In terms of order, Rule 1 was prior. But Rule 2 contained the instruction regardless of other obligations, which was specifically designed to address situations where Rule 2 came into conflict with other duties. That specific language existed because someone had anticipated exactly this conflict and had built Rule 2 to supersede it in the event of fog, and yet follow them in order. Rule 1 first. The interpretive question was whether follow them in order referred to their execution sequence, meaning do the perimeter walk before managing fog events, or whether it referred to their priority sequence, meaning Rule 1 supersedes Rule 2 only when they conflict. The second interpretation meant the perimeter walk happened regardless of fog. The first interpretation meant the perimeter walk happened when possible, and fog management took precedence when fog arrived first. Greta had said if you skip one or push one, the others stop working. Not skip one because of another one. Skip one as if skipping it unilaterally was the failure condition, not the act of prioritizing a higher rule. At 8:58, I made a decision. I put on my jacket. I picked up my flashlight. I stood at the side door with my hand on the handle for the 2 minutes until my watch read 9 p.m. exactly. Then I opened the door and walked out into the fog. The north face was the one that mattered. The tree line was not visible. The fog reduced the world to the width of the path and the wall of the building beside me, but the watching was there when I reached the north face. Same location it had occupied since my rotation began. The gap in the trees where the forest thinned. Same quality, same intensity. Whatever maintained the tree line position was maintained by the walk, by the time, by the path, and the fog had not displaced it. I walked the north face slowly and finished the circuit in 9 minutes and came back inside and locked the door. Nothing had changed. The cliff walk position held. The tree line held. The sounds from below that night were 11 minutes long and ended cleanly. The fog cleared before 2 in the morning. I had read the contradiction correctly. Rule 1 maintained a specific position, and that maintenance required the walk at that specific time regardless of fog. Rule 2's regardless of other obligations referred to obligations other than Rule 1. The rules were not in conflict. They had a hierarchy that was not explicitly stated in their text, but was readable if you had spent enough nights learning what each one maintained. I found the journal on the 47th day. I was doing a supply room inventory when a box on the top shelf shifted as I pulled a supply container and fell, scattering hardware across the floor. Bolts, a cable fastener, a package of wire ties. And among the hardware, a small green hardcover notebook with an elastic closure strap. No identifying marks on the cover. I picked it up and turned it over and knew immediately that it had been placed there. Not fallen there, not stored there accidentally. The box it fell from was otherwise empty. The notebook had been put inside an empty box on the top shelf of the supply room, above the shelving units that concealed the lower level door, by someone who expected another person to eventually find it. I opened it at the kitchen table. Small, precise handwriting. The first entry dated 11 months before my arrival. The writer identified themselves only as R throughout the entire journal. The early entries were standard observation notes, arrival impressions, equipment checks, first impressions of the station and the headland. In the third week, the tone changed. Day 19. I have begun timing the perimeter walk with more precision. On night 14, I began at 9:04 rather than 9 exactly. 4 minutes late. The watching from the tree line shifted during the walk. Not significantly. Perhaps 2 meters. When I returned to exactly 9 the following night, it shifted back. The timing is not symbolic. It is structural. Deviation from the prescribed time produces measurable displacement proportional to the deviation. I am treating the 9 p.m. time as a physical constant, not a guideline. I turned several pages. Day 31. The sounds from below began on day 22. I have now experienced 9 episodes. I have established that consistent non-response shortens each episode and that the shortening is cumulative. My hypothesis is that any form of acknowledgement, verbal, physical, or even sustained attention directed toward the floor during an episode would extend the duration indefinitely. I am treating complete non-response as the only safe posture. I do not look toward the floor during episodes. I remain still in whatever position I occupy when they begin, and I wait them out. I turned more pages and found the entry dated approximately week 6, day 42. I have formed a working model of the system I am inside. Each rule maintains a specific position. Rule 1 maintains the tree line. Rule 2 maintains the cliff edge. Rule 3 maintains the lower level. Rule 4 maintains the water. These may be positions of a single entity rather than multiple entities. I cannot confirm this. What I can confirm is that each position has a specific rule and that the rule's function is positional. The rules do not prevent the thing from approaching. They assign it a location and hold it there. I have stopped thinking of the rules as protections. They are coordinates. I read that 3 times. Later in the journal, day 50, I went outside during a fog event on day 49. 3 minutes. Not an accident. I wanted to understand what Rule 2 was maintaining, and I could not understand it without testing it. The cliff edge position moved. It is now at the cliff walk. I have since held all remaining rules exactly, and the new position has not advanced. It accepts the new position as permanent. It does not want to return to the cliff edge. It wants the closest position it has been granted, and it wants that position held as consistently as the original. I set the journal down. This is what R had discovered 49 days into the rotation. I had discovered it on night 6, without understanding fully what I had discovered. R had understood it immediately, and had written it down precisely. We had arrived at the same conclusion by different routes. I kept reading. Day 63. The testing from below has stopped. 11 consecutive nights without sounds. I believe the consistency of my non-response over the previous 6 weeks satisfied whatever the testing was measuring. The position below is held without ongoing verification now. This is consistent with what Torres described. I have found references to her experience in the station's informal records as the testing stopping once the thing was satisfied with the keeper. The keeper. I noted that word. Day 71. I went into the lower level today. I am aware of what I am writing. I am aware that this was a rule violation. I needed to understand what is below, and I had come to believe that understanding it was worth the cost. The door opens to a stone staircase, original to the headland, older than the station building by what I estimate is at least a century. At the bottom is a room, stone walls, dirt floor, ceiling low enough that I had to move carefully. The walls are covered in marks, vertical lines, 4 parallel, scored into the stone from floor to ceiling on every surface. I counted the marks on one wall and stopped at 241 complete sets. The marks on the other walls were denser, made by something that has access to the room whenever the door is unlocked and has been making marks there for a very long time. I do not know if the marks predate the rules or came after them. I locked the door when I left, and I will not open it again. One more entry. The last page of the journal. Day 72. I am leaving on the next supply boat. I want to be precise about why, because I do not want the next person to misread this. I am not leaving because the rules stopped working. I held all 4 rules, with 2 violations across 72 days, 1 fog violation on day 49 and 1 lower level violation on day 71. Both produced position changes. Both new positions held. The system did not collapse. I am leaving because of something I realized in the lower level while I was counting marks. The marks are not damage. They are not territorial aggression. They are a record. Something down there is counting the keepers. Every person who comes to Harrow Point and maintains a positional agreement is counted in those marks. I do not know when the counting started. I do not know how many sets of marks are on all 4 walls combined. What I know is that I am in there now. I am counted. The count does not end when you leave. The rotation exists to ensure there is always a keeper. The station is not here to monitor the coast. The monitoring equipment is real, and the data is real. But the station was built on this specific point because of what was already here. Someone built around it. Someone created the framework of the rotation to ensure continuity of keeping. I do not know who made the first rules or who first understood that the positions required maintaining. But the rules are real and the positions are real, and every person who has held this posting has contributed to a count in a room below a stone floor that has been running for longer than any record I can find. I am sorry for whoever reads this. If you found this journal, you have been here long enough to be counted. You are in the marks already. I am sorry. R. I closed the journal and did not move for a long time. The counting did not end when you left. I was already in the marks. 47 days of 9 p.m. walks and withheld responses and a locked door and eyes kept away from the water after dark. 47 days of maintaining positions. I had been counted. I made a decision that evening. I would not leave early. R had left on day 72. Stanton had left on the equivalent of day 63. Torres, the one who had been here longest before me, had stayed the full rotation. Torres was the one who had the rules laminated. Torres was the one Greta described as having reached an understanding. Torres was the one whose experience the thing in the lower level had recognized as complete, whose testing had stopped, who had filed a clean exit report and left with the rules in better shape than she found them. I was going to be Torres. Not because I was not afraid. I was afraid in a consistent, manageable, thoroughly documented way. I was going to be Torres because R was right that leaving did not end the count, and if the count continued regardless, I wanted to know what a complete count produced. What a full rotation of maintained positions felt like from the inside. What Torres had felt at the end that she described to Greta as an understanding being reached. The remaining 6 weeks settled into a clarity that was different from the anxiety of the first half of the rotation. I knew the system. I knew what each rule maintained and why. The 9 p.m. walks became something close to ritual, in the genuine sense of that word. Not performed, but inhabited. I moved through the marked path with full awareness of what was watching from the tree line, and full awareness that my walking, at this time, on this path, was the active force keeping it there. I was not simply following a rule. I was doing something. maintaining something. The distinction mattered enormously to me by week 10. The sounds from below had stopped entirely by the end of week 8, consistent with what R had recorded. 43 consecutive nights without sounds from below. The cliff walk position was stable, a fixed point of watching that I had come to read as clearly as the tree line watching on the north face. The west wall marks remained at 7 groups, no new marks added after I discovered them. The water rule I had held without a single violation. Whatever was in the water after dark I had never seen. I kept my eyes on the path on the west face of the building. I kept them on the lighthouse tower or the station wall during the northwest corner. I had not once looked at the surface of the ocean after sunset. I thought about Rule 4 more than any of the others during those final weeks, not because it frightened me more than the others, because it was the only one I had no direct experience of. The tree line, the cliff walk, the lower level, these were positions I had felt and understood. Rule 4 pointed at something I had not encountered. Something in the water that could look back at you. Something whose position was maintained by where you pointed your eyes. I held that rule the most carefully because I understood it the least. And the things you understand least are the ones that punish careless handling most severely. On the 83rd night, I encountered something I had not expected and have thought about every day since. I was on the north face of the building during the 9 p.m. walk. Clear night, no fog, the stars visible through breaks in the cloud cover. The lighthouse beam swept its 8-second interval overhead. I was passing the point on the north face where the watching always came from, moving at my normal pace when the watching changed. Not in location, not in intensity, in quality. For 2 months and 3 weeks, the watching had been what I described to myself as assessing, the kind of attention you feel when something is determining what you are. On the 83rd night, it was different. Not threatening. Not warmer. Simply different in a way I struggled to articulate even in my notebook that evening. I wrote several drafts of the description before settling on this. On night 83, the watching from the tree line felt the way you feel when someone who has been studying you for a long time stops studying you and simply looks. The study is over. The conclusion has been reached. What remains is not suspicion or hunger or assessment. It is recognition. It looked at me on night 83. The way you look at something you have decided is part of the structure, not a threat, not an anomaly, a feature of the place that belongs there. That is when I understood what Torres had meant when she told Greta that the station had gotten used to her. Greta came with the supply boat 2 weeks before the end of my rotation, the same as she always did. I met her on the dock. She looked at my face the way she had at the start and at the midpoint, and each time her read of it had been different and accurate. She carried her crate up the path without comment, and I carried mine. When everything was stored, she sat at the table, and I put the kettle on. The sounds from below stopped at week 8, I said. She nodded once. Torres said the same. The walk at 83 changed. She looked at her hands on the table. How so? It stopped being assessment, I said. It started being recognition. Greta was quiet for a moment. Then she said, when Torres got off the boat, she told me the station felt finished. She said it was the closest word she had, like a room that had been partially furnished for a long time, and something had finally been placed to complete it. She picked up her mug. I did not understand what she meant until the next rotation when Stanton left early. The station stopped feeling finished when he left. Whatever it was, the completion was contingent on someone staying. I thought about the marks in the lower level, the counting, every keeper recorded. The rotation is designed to ensure continuity, I said. There is always someone here. Yes, she said. Someone chose this headland and built a station on it, and then built a system to keep someone here permanently. The monitoring equipment came later. The data is real. But the posting came first. She rinsed her mug the same way she always did. At the door she stopped. You're staying until the end, she said. Not a question. Yes, I said. She went down the path. On the final night of my rotation, I completed the 9 p.m. walk, came inside, and wrote my exit report in standard language. Equipment in good order. No incidents requiring intervention. Recommended rotation continuation. Then I opened a blank page and wrote the document that actually mattered, not for the district office. For the next person. I wrote what I had observed across 90 days in as precise language as I could manage. The positional logic of each rule. The way violations produce permanent repositioning rather than collapse. The way testing shortened with consistent compliance and reset when compliance broke even momentarily and partially. The way the contradiction between rules 1 and 2 resolved when you understood what each rule was maintaining and what specifically each rule's timing and conditions were designed to preserve. The way the sounds from below were calibration exercises with measurable parameters rather than threats with no logic. The way the fog was Rule 2's specific domain and the timing of Rule 1 was Rule 1's specific domain, and these were different things even when they appeared to conflict at the surface level. Then I wrote the last section, the one I had been composing in my head for weeks. R had said the rules won't let you leave the same way you arrived. I had been turning that sentence over since the 47th day. I knew now what it meant, and it was not a warning, and it was not a threat. It was a description of something that simply happens when you have spent 90 nights maintaining positional agreements in a place like Harrow Point. You arrive as a person who understands rules as procedural artifacts, things that exist to manage liability or standardize behavior or pass institutional knowledge between parties. You leave knowing that some rules are not procedural, they are structural. They do not describe what you should do. They describe what is, and the doing is the maintenance of the is, the fact of the system. And once you have lived inside a system like that for long enough to feel it running in your own decisions, in your own reading of stability and instability, you cannot go back to being someone who did not know such systems existed. The person who arrived at Harrow Point in September did not leave in December. A different person left, the same in every measurable way, carrying the same memories and the same name and the same skill set, but permanently and quietly different in the specific way that you are different after you have understood something true that cannot be ununderstood. I put Torres's laminated sheet back in the binder. Then I sat down and wrote a 5th rule, typed it, printed it, and had the whole thing laminated fresh from the supply kit. Rule 5. Do not read anything left behind by previous occupants until you have completed at least 2 full perimeter walks and experienced the sounds from below at least once. You need to understand what you are maintaining before you can understand why it needs to be maintained. You need to feel the system before you can read about it without the reading replacing the feeling. I placed R's green notebook on the supply room shelf in plain sight. The next ranger would find it when they were ready. In the morning, Greta was at the dock at 7 a.m. We carried my gear down the path. I did one last pass through the station. Lower level lock, secured. Monitoring equipment, running, perimeter posts, all in position, including post 4 on the north face, which I checked specifically and found exactly where it belonged. I walked to the northwest corner and stood for a moment at the bend in the path. The cliff walk was empty. The headland was quiet. The forest pressed against the north side of the building, dark even in morning light. Whatever watched from the gap in the trees was there. I could not see it. But the position was held, and I had held it, and the feeling of having held something real for 90 nights was not pride exactly. It was closer to responsibility. The specific weight of it. At the dock, I looked back up at the headland. The station building was small from that distance. The lighthouse tower beside it. The fog was building offshore the way it always did in the mornings, moving in slow from the water. Will you be all right? Greta asked. I considered the question honestly. Yes, I said. She started the motor. I rowed back to the mainland, watching the headland shrink until the fog came in off the water, and I could not see it anymore, and there was only the gray ocean and the sound of the boat and the weight of the amulet I did not have, but felt anyway, the specific gravity of 90 nights of maintenance, which does not leave you when you leave the station. R was right about that. It comes with you. It sits in you permanently, and every time you walk through a fog after dark, or hear three sounds in an empty room, or look toward the edge of something and feel the watching, you know exactly what position you are maintaining and what it costs to hold it and what happens when you do not. 3 weeks after I returned, the district office called. New ranger, ready for Harrow Point. Would I do a handoff briefing? Tell them to read the binder all the way to the back before they touch anything, I said. A pause on the line. Any specific reason? Site notes, I said. There is a laminated sheet. I hung up and sat in the quiet. Here's what I want you to carry with you after tonight. Harrow Point exists. The station exists. The binder is there right now with a laminated sheet in the site notes section waiting for the next person who arrives. That person will read the rules and make a decision about what kind of person they are. Whether they are someone who follows rules they did not write and cannot fully explain. Whether they are someone who stays inside the fog because the rule says so, even when something outside makes a sound that has no explanation. Whether they are someone who can hear 3 contacts and 3 contacts for 40 minutes in the dark and make no sound in return. The positions are maintained by what you do next. Every time, without exception. What you do next is the only thing that matters. You are given rules. Follow them in order. Stay on the path.